Hey everybody! The first story I'm going to do today is called Haunted Rooms for Rent, and it's set in Toronto, Ontario. One chilly January day in 1886, a widow and her daughter moved their possessions into their new home. They were looking forward to living in the roomy upper floor flat they just rented in an old house on Gerrard Street in Toronto. The next morning they were moving their things out of the house as fast as they could carry them. Their first night there had been absolutely terrifying. The first thing they noticed was how cold the place was, even though they had managed to get a good fire going in the fireplace. Tired, they snuggled up under their extra bedclothes and eventually fell asleep, but not for long. Just before midnight they were awakened by a loud banging and slamming sounds downstairs, and then, even though their bedroom door was shut, a blast of wintry air blew through the room, lifting the blankets right off their bed. The mother went out into the hall and called downstairs to Mr. Farrell, the owner who lived on the lower floor, asking him to shut the doors, but he had no idea what she was talking about. Worried what her imagination was playing tricks on her, the mother went back to bed, calmed her daughter down, and said they should try to get some more sleep. But sleep never came. A while later, a dark, mysterious shape drifted over the bed, leaving them trembling with fear, as did the thumping footsteps they heard moving along the hall. Mother and daughter clung to each other until dawn. Then they rose, got dressed, packed their bags, and left, telling Mr. Farrell that nothing could make them stay another minute in the upstairs flat they had hoped to call home. That was the first story. Now, story number 2 is called Dream Warning, and it's set in Tagish Lake, Yukon. Tagish Lake is a long, narrow lake crossing the border between Yukon and British Columbia. For hundreds of years, members of the Gwich'in Nation lived a nomadic life along its shores. Then gold was discovered at Bonanza Creek in 1896, and the Klondike Gold Rush began. Prospectors from the south started moving into and through the area. Today, the Klondike Highway follows the western arm of the lake in the Yukon much as the prospectors did more than a century ago. Although the lake was rather isolated, it made news around the world after a large meteorite crashed into its frozen surface in January of 2000. A local resident, Jim Brooke, collected the 200-gram meteorite and other smaller pieces of space rock and made them available to researchers. They were very excited by his find. The Tagish meteorite turned out to be the most pristine or uncontaminated meteorite they had ever analyzed, and it was the very first one they identified as having come all the way from a band of asteroids between Mars and Jupiter. The lake had also caught the attention of UFO researchers. In the early 1970s, 3 people, 2 men and a woman, reported seeing 7 large round objects moving slowly around in the sky over the lake. One of the men took a picture of the mysterious bright orbs, and the other sent the photo to weather officials in Ottawa in the hope of learning what the UFOs were. He was eventually told that any information about them was classified. But the most unusual event reported about the lake made the news back in 1916, when a somewhat strange article appeared in the Nome Daily Nugget, the daily newspaper at the time in Nome, Alaska. The article recounted how Don Mack, a mining engineer working in northern Canada and Alaska, had written to a woman named Ethel Williams to thank her for saving him from drowning in Tagish Lake. In his letter, Mac explained that he had been crossing the frozen lake by sled with 3 native men and a French Canadian when they decided to camp for the night on a small island. During the night, Mac had a vivid dream in which a young woman appeared. She identified herself as Ethel Williams of Syracuse, New York, and she warned him not to travel in the direction he planned to go the next day, because the snow-covered ice there was dangerously thin. When Mac awoke, the other men were packing up and getting ready to set off again, so he told them about his disturbing dream and suggested they follow a new route. But they had just laughed at him and set off as planned, leaving him to continue his journey alone. Mac wrote that he had detoured around the dangerous area he had been warned about by the apparition, and made it safely to Skagway. But the 4 other men never showed up. Worried, he organized a search party to go back and look for them. Several days later, he was both saddened and stunned when he found the missing men's canoes and some of their gear floating in the lake's icy waters, very close to the place he had been warned to avoid. Mac and the other searchers presumed the 4 had drowned. Their bodies were never found. Back in his office in Juneau, Alaska, Mac couldn't get thoughts of his dream and narrow escape out of his head. After doing some research, he learned that a young woman named Ethel Williams did indeed live in Syracuse, New York, and he couldn't resist writing to her. He wanted to thank her for saving his life. Someone in Ethel's family, perhaps Ethel herself, was amazed when this letter arrived that it was reported to a local newspaper, and the article that appeared was eventually picked up by the Nome Daily Nugget. Ethel had been astonished when she read the letter, because she had never heard of Don Mac or Tagish Lake, and she had absolutely no way of knowing the ice conditions there in the late fall. But apparently Mac had met her once, in a dream he would never forget. Okay, that's all for this video. See you guys later.